Hey guys, David here with a new video game review, Star Wars Battlefront. One of the more talked about games from last year, ever since that first video came out from EA 2013, maybe 2014, but I'm banking on 2013 when they released that video by EA and DICE where they showed that snowy planet and then you see the AT-AT foot drop and it says Star Wars Battlefront and everyone lost their minds because Battlefront are one of the Battlefront games, Battlefront 1 and Battlefront 2, and I actually own Battlefront 2. Give me one quick second. Here we go. Alright, Star Wars Battlefront 2 for the PlayStation 2, and man, this feels heavy. Just look at how big the game cases were back then for the PlayStation 2. Here I have Battlefront 2 for the PlayStation 2. Covered in dust. Let me open it up. Here you got the game, and then you got the instruction booklet, which weighs a ton here. Yeah, this was pretty cool, and I remember playing this and playing the narrative and playing the dogfights up in the galaxy with all those giant spaceships attacking each other and just flying from one end to the next. And granted, Star Wars Battlefront 2 is centered mostly around the prequels, but they did have a little bit of the original trilogy up in there. And over the course of the years, the Battlefront games developed some kind of cult following, because I remember when these games came out, they were well received, but they didn't get like 8s and 9s and even some 10s from video game websites. They mainly rested around the 6, 7, a few 8 out of 10s from some websites. But it wasn't over the years that it developed this following that a lot of people wanted a third Battlefront game. But an actual third installment didn't come until EA and DICE got the rights to make Star Wars games for like the next few years or so from Disney. And their first entry comes in the form of somewhat of a reboot in the form of Star Wars Battlefront by EA, because they're going to make sure that you know that this game is from EA by not only putting the EA logo here in the corner, as well as the EA symbol right below the Battlefront logo itself. So how does it fare off? Well, here's the story for Star Wars Battlefront, is that there isn't any! I think it is somewhat clever for EA to say, hey, story mode? Sorry. Dogfights up in space? Yeah, you're gonna have to settle for the atmosphere. You want to visit every single planet, even the ones from the prequels? Sorry, only the original trilogy. Which, from a movie standpoint, we respect, but from a video game standpoint, there's some stuff from the prequels that they could have used to great effect. No matter how many toys General Grievous was made out to sell, I think he would have worked very well in a Star Wars video game. But EA settled for cutting corners, and so because of that, we ended up with EA's Star Wars Battlefront. So how does Battlefront fare off? Well, it's a very, very fun Star Wars game, but it's one that I suggest you play for a limited amount of time at a time, because after a while the appeal is just going to wear down and you're going to get tired of hearing the same musical cues over and over again, no matter how much you love John Williams, and you're going to get tired of playing the same modes no matter how much you love them. Star Wars Battlefront has a multiplayer section as well as a single player section. However, the single player kind of gets old after a while. Let's just say that the modes that you were given, from the training section to the battles that are simply just, Rebels versus Imperials, fight, as well as the survival mode, which is pretty much a horde mode, waves after wave of enemies, and you have to survive. It's not infinite, there's only like 15, but each one has a new set amount of enemies that are going after you, but you get some added perks to help you fend them off. Let's just say that all of the single player stuff, once you try it once, you don't really have to try it again. You really, really don't. You try every single section in the single player stuff and you're pretty much done. And sure, the only way to make things feel new is if you try it with somebody else in co-op, whether it be someone locally, right next to you in split screen, or someone over the internet and online. But you don't really have to do much more of it, because after a while you're just going to get tired of it, because it's legitimately the same mode rehashed with the maps with a different map over and over. Speaking of which, you get 5 maps. Initially it was 4, but they added, I believe, a 5th one since its release free of charge. but you can only look at these planets so many times. I mean, Hoth, this game is beautiful, no doubt about it. Much like the most recent Battlefield games, also from DICE, the engine that they use, the gameplay itself is very beautiful, very refined, very tight. And it's sure, they lifted the engine from the Battlefield games and added a Star Wars coat of paint to it, but I dig it. I fall for it because it's nice to be able to control a rebel fighter or an Imperial stormtrooper and having those sound effects coming out of the blasters, or even a hero like Luke Skywalker, or a villain like Darth Vader or the Emperor, and being able to hear those sound effects of the lightsabers and cutting down people and seeing those sparks fly out of their bodies when you kill them. Very nostalgic, and I gave into it. Even though some of the voice work could have been a little bit better. I mean, that does not sound like Darth Vader at all. To me, it just doesn't. It just felt very off.
There is no defense against the dark side.
I feel like they could have gotten some good sound-alikes, but EA, cutting those corners once again. The gameplay is there, the look of the game is there, but that's what makes us so... that's what makes the whole situation feel tragic, that they didn't go for a single-player narrative. Despite those cutscenes you see at the beginning of every single-player mission. You're like, oh, wish it could have been there, but it's not. So we have to settle with the mode of the section of this game that DICE was heavily focusing on, which was the multiplayer. It was going to be a multiplayer-centric game, so okay, let's go ahead and try it out. Well, I feel like just like the single player is divided into 3 sections, you got the training, you got the battles, and then you got the survival mode, which is, the waves after waves. Multiplayer is kind of divided into those similar tiers. You got the tier of modes that you're just not going to play after trying them once. You try them once, and then you're like, you know what, I'm done. I'm not going to play this. They're horrendous. I don't like these modes. I don't have fun with them. I'm done. And there are a fair share of those types of modes for me as well, especially Drop Zone. I don't know if it was because of the teams that they would put me in, but Drop Zone was very tedious for me. Then the next tier would be those modes that you would try a number of times. They're fun, but they're not my favorites. And I feel like that's the largest tier that you're going to find with Battlefront, where you got these different modes that you have fun playing during the actual matches, but once you get out of them, you're not going to have this want to revisit them. Like in the third tier, where you got those definitive modes in multiplayer that you're going to want to come back over and over again, because you have this genuine sense of addiction to them, because you're like, oh my god, I can't get enough of these humongous battles on these planets. No matter how many times I look at the planets over and over again, I'm having fun with the gameplay, and I'm having fun with these other people in these matches. And for me, those modes that I kept going back to over and over again were Blast, which is pretty much team deathmatch. It's practically the most generic mode that there is in this game, and I have to give them credit for coming out with some really creative modes, because that's what really fell in that second tier for me, that I actually wanted to play a couple more times, was because of how different these modes were. Like, oh, you have to capture this thing, but at the same time, this sometimes they would get a little asymmetric with it, and I was having fun with that turn to the mode. But for me, the ones that I kept going back to were Blast, and also Fighter Squadron, I think it was called. It's something Squadron. But it's pretty much the mode where you get to take control of a spaceship and fly it around and fight in these atmospheric dogfights, because sadly, you cannot go in space. EA says, oh, space battles from Battlefront 1 and 2? Forget about it. I actually have Battlefront 2 for the PlayStation 2. You see this? You see this? This was the good shit. So it does get tiring to see the same planet over and over again after literally just an hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours of gameplay, and as well as the music. And that's the biggest detriment to Battlefront, is how limited it is. Because the gameplay is there. The presentation is there. The game is beautiful to look at. So many times I would often just look of how accurate they got Planet Hoth or Tatooine or whatever planet they're tackling. Even some that I don't even remember from the original trilogy, like Sullust or whatever it's called. It's a very pretty looking lava planet. Even though I don't remember it from the original trilogy, the artwork is there, and the production value behind the game is there, and the fact that they were able to take that original engine from the Battlefield games and apply it with Star Wars added to it, it pulled me in because of how it tugged at my nostalgic strings, but in a good way where I'm like, okay, fine, I'm having fun with the gameplay. I'm having fun being able to hear the Star Wars score play as I'm able to blast people away with those classic sound effects. But the best thing that EA can do from this point on is to make that season pass worth it by adding things from a whole different spectrum. No matter how many times they say, we're not doing the prequels, we're not doing Force Awakens, that's your only saving grace right now, EA, to make Battlefront what it could have been, is to add those things via patches. Even if you do charge people with the season pass, make that season pass worth it. $50, add enough content in there that could be practically another game entirely, with space combat, with material from the prequels. No matter how much we don't like those movies, there's stuff in there that you could have used for fun gameplay, being able to play as those vulture droids from the prequels, or being able to play as Darth Maul or General Grievous. That's your only saving grace, because sure, you're not going to add a single player, because that's a whole another component that's very, very difficult to add through like a patch or through like a season pass. But little by little, you could improve Star Wars Battlefront over the course of the next couple of years. And that's the closest that we'll get to a new generation of those initial Battlefront and Battlefront 2 games that we have grown to love. So, in the end, Star Wars Battlefront becomes a game that is very fun to play for like a week. And through the course of the week, you play for like 1-2 hours at a time, and that's really about it. Because if you continue to force yourself, no pun intended, to play it, it's going to lose its appeal, because that's initially what EA brought us with this game. So I give Star Wars Battlefront a low 8 out of 10. Very fun while you're playing it, but after a while, it just makes you wish of what you could have had rather than what you actually ended up with. So let me know what you guys thought of Star Wars Battlefront. If you have played it, but you have not, and would like to purchase the game, even after watching my review, then be sure to use the link in the description below. But please wait for EA to do something a little sensical with the content that they're bringing us, because we can only vote with our wallets at this time. Granted, it is EA. God even knows if they're listening. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.